say thank you for the privilege of being here to appear before you. I know that I'm outclassed and outnumbered. And Mr. Marble, I apologize for my secretary's misspelling of your name when I said you're clever. I don't have documents before me. I'm not a researcher. I was a 17-year-old girl that was at Eagle Plaza that day taking pictures of the president when he was assassinated. I never wanted to become a public figure over this. Never intended to until my name was accidentally leaked to the press in 1977. I was not a public figure. It has caused me great grief. It has caused me a lot of concern in my life. I have been called a liar as recently as today. I have been called a hoax. I'm neither a liar nor am I a hoax. I am who I say I am. I was down there that day standing between 20 and 30 feet from the president when he was shot. I was taking a movie film, which on the 25th of November was confiscated by a man who identified himself as an FBI agent. I have never, until recently, started trying to inquire about my film because I'm extremely patriotic. Did not see that there was any reason to, because I had assumed all these years that it was like up until the year 2029 as evidence. And I'm still not sure that there's anything sinister about it, and that's why I'm here. I would just like an explanation as to what happened to my film and where it is. And that's the only reason that I'm here.
Questions? Could you just briefly indicate to us what measures or steps you've taken to secure your property?
Well, I have not taken any other than questioning people, but there have been people like a Mr. Woods and a Gary Shaw and different people who have made inquiries about my film in the past. Like I said, I have never until recently felt any need to until I began to be called a liar and a hoax and decided that I needed to stand up for myself and my own rights, and so that's why I'm here. There have been documents making reference to my film that Ms. Walko has sent me in the recent past. One of the documents that I remember that Gary Shaw and Mr. Woods one requested, it said that it's not in their possession at this time. Another one was the film that was taken by Ms. Oliver has not been retained by this office. So there's multiple references to my film, and I would just like to know where they are. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm not here to embarrass anybody. I want to know. And I think I have a right to that.
Did you have any documentary evidence that the film was taken by the FBI?
No, because I was only 17 years old, and I wasn't smart enough to ask for a receipt. This was a man representing my government. If he had asked me for my soul, I would have tried to give it to him. Also, there are ulterior motives, and I will go ahead and tell you that before someone else does. Laying next to the camera in my makeup kit was a Prince Albert can of marijuana. And I would have done anything to keep him from looking in my makeup kit. But also, let me share this with you. I no longer use marijuana or anything else. I'm a born-again Christian, and I'm married to a preacher and have been for 23 years.
Might I ask you if you would withdraw the word about class?
Thank you.
Ms. Oliver, were these still photographs?
No, they were a movie camera.
Movie camera?
Yes. It was an 8mm.
8mm?
Yes, I've been accused of saying it was a Super 8, but I don't recall that. And to the House Select Committee investigator, Jack Moriarty, in 1977, March the 12th, I told him it was a movie camera, not a Super 8 movie camera. I just recently got my type deposition. I was glad to see that.
Had you got the film developed?
No, I had not. It was an experimental camera that a friend of mine named Lawrence Taylor Rocco Jr. had given me, and I had to send the film, and I don't recall why, but I had to send it to Rochester. It was a magazine, and that may be why. You didn't roll it on, it was a magazine. And I just had not done it. And I found some film, this is something I brought with me to the Ask Symposium, because people are often curious about why I didn't do it. I have film that I have no earthly idea how they are or how they're ever going to develop them. It's a movie film, and I brought it. I'm going to get somebody to look at it and see what I can do to get it developed, and so it probably won't be able to be developed. That's just a flaw in my character. But I would like to make one statement to you and to anybody else who's interested. When all the pictures all the pieces of this puzzle is put together. And I have faith enough in my government and in my country to believe that eventually it will be all out. All of it will be given to the researchers and the research community, unredacted, unedited, undamaged in any manner. And whenever this is all put together and we really have the honest picture of what happened that day, no one more than Beverly Oliver hopes I have to stand up to America and apologize. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Steve Osborne. Good afternoon, Mr. Osborne.
Good afternoon. I too appreciate the opportunity to address the board today and appreciate the time that you're spending going to the public for information. One of the theories of the assassination revolves around the possibility that there may have been some involvement by persons with experience in the U.S. intelligence community. In my study and research of the assassination, I've discovered and investigated supporting information of the presence of an intelligence unit of the U.S. Army, having been present and on assignment in Dealey Plaza just before, during, and immediately after the assassination. To the best of my knowledge, information on this unit has not been released publicly. 1992, as the fury of the public resulted in proposed legislation which created your board, I came across an individual who claimed to have been very near Dealey Plaza during the assassination. As a researcher, you can understand that this immediately caught my attention, and I began to question this gentleman about the experience. Now, before I tell you this entire story, I want you to know that I had a difficult time believing his story the more and more I thought about it. Even though I had personal experience with some of the devices and the techniques that this group used, I was still very skeptical, as you may be also. But with further investigation, I convinced myself that it technically could have been accomplished, and I think you'll be so impressed about the possibility when we are finished. The gentleman I spoke with proceeded to tell me he was in the Army station in Fort Hood, McLean, Texas. On the day of the assassination, his group, a communications group, was assigned the task of observing and videotaping the presidential motorcade as it moved through the plaza. This unit had no similar assignment in any other Texas city during the president's visit, and they were only to tape that portion of the motorcade as it proceeded through Dealey Plaza. Now, if this event actually occurred, it actually happened, it makes their activity highly suspicious and adds new questions to the assassination, particularly with reference to the possible foreknowledge of the assassination of intelligence personnel. In my conversations with this gentleman, I asked questions of a technical nature, trying to discover how their assignment was accomplished. After discovering that the camera signals were transported by wireless means back to the control studio, which was actually a semi-tractor trailer, I found myself doubting that this type of equipment was available in 1963. I knew that ham radio operators had been sending television signals easily for a number of years, and I had also participated in that hobby. I also knew that videotaping was still in its infant years in 1963. I started to research available equipment to see if the story had any possibility of being true. I have another hand up that I'd like to give him.
Thank you.
Now that we know that the equipment existed in 1963, and I can tell you a little bit about the equipment if you'd like, and the question and answer, I can relate his entire story. The following information was obtained over approximately 3 separate conversations with this individual. I had extracted a verbal consent to get his story on videotape, like any good researcher would. But when the time came for doing so, his attitude on the matter had completely reversed, and I only left today with the recollection of the notes that I had taken from the conversation and the subsequent information by my independent investigation. This military communications group had several cameras stationed around the plaza. The signals from the cameras were sent back to a semi-tractor trailer acting as a mobile studio parked a short distance from the plaza. Each camera had a preview monitor and videotape machine associated with it inside the trailer recording the view of each camera. there was no sound recorded in this assignment. Each videotape position had a single person responsible for its proper operation. Each position these men occupied was shielded from the others so that they could only see the preview for their individual camera. Each man saw the assassination occur from a different perspective of their monitors. About 15 minutes after the assassination, a group of men appeared to identify themselves as FBI agents. These agents seized all the equipment used to videotape the motorcade. Each man was put on a bus which had been summoned at the scene, and they were all driven back to their base. Upon their arrival, they were simply told to forget it. Finding that there was equipment available in 1963 that would do this made it easier for me to accept the story I've just related to you. Several things have made me believe that this group was an intelligence unit. First, the gentleman would not give me the name of his unit. Secondly, this individual advised me that his 201 file was inaccessible. Thirdly, he offered his opinion as pertaining to the reason his group was sent there, which would probably have been in line with the responsibility of an intelligence unit. Fourth, having reflected on the story and what I have additionally discovered, I am impressed that he realized that he probably said more things to me than he should have revealed. At one point, he had mentioned that he was allowed by a letter from the military to discuss some things in relation to his duties on the day of the assassination. But I believe he probably went further than he was allowed. All these things collectively make me believe that this unit in Dealey Plaza was an intelligence unit. Still, one important step in my investigation was to find some additional evidence that the event occurred. You should know that there's possible photographic evidence of this communication group being in Dealey Plaza that day, and I'd be happy to provide you with further information on that if time allows at the end of my presentation. Some requested things I would like to see the board do. Obviously, what was recorded on these videotapes would be an invaluable aid to a serious study of the assassination, as well as cast more suspicion upon the intelligence community. An attempt should be made by the board to locate the tapes and request that another government agency attempt to get the exact electrical format determined and a videotape machine constructed to bring their images to view. Duplication to modern-day formats would then make the tapes available publicly. So far as locating the videotapes are concerned, the Dallas Field Office of the FBI and the Bureau headquarters may have information or be in possession of the tapes. If there remains in the state of the late J. Edgar Hoover, they may have some information or be in possession of the tapes themselves. If the men who seized the tapes were not real FBI agents, then CIA, military intelligence, and other splinter groups of the intelligence community should be checked. Also, I would inquire of Mr. E. Howard Hunt if he's still alive as to his knowledge of the tapes and their subsequent disposition. There exists a possibility that he may even have them in his possession. Regarding locations where you might find documents supporting this activity, I would suggest beginning with records at Fort Hood. I would not be familiar with other depositories of documents, and we will probably have to use some of your existing sources to hopefully lead you in the correct direction. There seems to be a problem of gag orders that I'd like to address also. The fact that this individual I interviewed had received notification that he did not have to continue to keep certain things confidential is further indication that there continue to be individuals who are under an obligation of confidentiality. I believe this brings up an interesting problem for the board. There appear to have been several instances of this happening to individuals required by military order or other executive branch order not to discuss any details of what they know of the assassination or subsequent investigations. Perhaps even the board members themselves have been required to sign promises of confidentiality. Since these individuals do not have the permission of disclosure, many have not written of their experiences or granted interviews to members of the media or the research community to record their recollections. This will give history an incomplete record of this tragic event, as well as making this information unavailable to the board for review and release. Therefore, I believe and propose that the board consider asking the President of the United States, as Commander-in-Chief, to rescind any and all standing orders issued from any department or part of the U.S. government requiring the confidentiality of the information retained by these individuals, whether that knowledge is in written or memory form. If our government is really serious about full disclosure of all facts surrounding the assassination, we will rescind these orders, prevent them from being renewed, and allow a complete compilation of personal records and recollections. This will allow the review board to further fulfill and properly perform its congressionally mandated task. And additionally, as distasteful and wild as the thought is that the American intelligence community could be involved in such an event, I hope the board will keep an open mind as you sift through the records. Your work may be the last official attempt to bring to the light of day this dark deed, so it is vital for you to question everything you find. Remember, if any intelligence personnel were involved, it's their profession, and they are very adept at covering up any evidence of their involvement in any activity. would we as citizens expect anything else of them? In any operation that U.S. intelligence personnel are involved in, we the citizens would expect them to be able to complete their missions with expert precision. We would expect that they would be able to cover up their involvement as an agency and our involvement as a nation if the nature of the task so dictates. We would expect them to have thought of every possible snag in an operation and work to make their mission completely successful. I have spoken with individuals involved in intelligence work or who have known persons who were, and they have indicated that the intelligence community could basically do anything they wanted. We've had some recent indications of that, of this in the form of millions of dollars spent on building projects unknown to Congress. Be this right or wrong, we as citizens should have a great amount of respect for and suspicion of the power that these individuals and agencies wield in our world. Please keep this in mind as you ponder the information brought to your attention in whatever form it's presented. Finally, I would like to make a comment in relation to the board's mandate. One of the problems that certain individuals in our government have had with the idea of releasing all the assassination records is that to do so may compromise methods employed by the various intelligence agencies in their covert activities. At first glance, we may take this to mean that it may make it difficult for them to use these techniques in the future if they are made known to the general public. But I would encourage the board to consider that it may be that many of these covert methods were used to carry out assassination of President Kennedy, whether by Americans or some other government. I have found considerable circumstantial evidence of more than a few intelligence techniques used in the assassination that may not be generally known. But if this assassination was accomplished by Americans from the intelligence community, they have not only betrayed the citizenry of this country by taking from them their president, but they betrayed their agencies and the U.S. public by making it necessary to uncover and publicly expose their methods in order to bring satisfaction to the American people in this matter. This betrayal of their agencies alone makes them no better than Mr. Ames in recent history. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Questions? Go ahead, Dr. Joyce.
Mr. Osborne, in your testimony, you indicated that information you had gathered from subsequent independent investigation helped you in forming your conclusion that there was an intelligence unit in Dealey Plaza. Is there any documentary information that you've been able to acquire as part of your subsequent investigation?
I have not made any attempts at that because I believe the story so thoroughly. I felt that if I were to make any attempts to confirm any of this or search for the tapes, that those things might be destroyed. Because these tapes of, and if you'd like to discuss photographic evidence, there's one that would probably show a shooter behind the stockade fence. So I did not want these materials because of something that I did to end up disappearing. However, your mandate and your sources are much better than anything that I did.
Mr. Chairman, with that in mind, I'd like to pose to you a set of questions, if I may. Who are you?
I am a citizen of the United States. I have not had any type of military experience, so I probably approach this a little bit differently as a citizen that would like to know what my government has been up to, or persons within my government have been up to, why I can't know, why it's been hushed up so much. I have been researching for approximately the last 15 years, not quite, and have mostly focused my investigation on identifying the man who fired the fatal headshot. These other things have just come about because of various digging, and this is one of the things that I hope to use to be able to further identify the individual.
I'm wondering, Mr. Chairman, for the record, that we could ask Mr. Osborne to provide us with a biographical statement. Would that be something I do? Can you provide us with the name of the individual with whom you spoke?
Because I feel that he may have violated military orders. I believe that he thought that he had originally been saying things he could, and then the way that he froze up, in fact, I've had several individuals who have done that. I feel that he may have been guilty of some sort of violation. If the president were to rescind all those orders, I would be happy to provide his name. At this point, because of the way that he did not really want to be involved anymore in the discussions, I feel incumbent upon myself his personal privacy not to.
Did he ever provide to you any written information, or did you take any notes coming out of the conversations with this individual?
The only thing that I really did was, from the conversations that we had, I prepared a list of questions, because I do have a technical background. I've been in electronics since I was 14, ham radio, television, and most recently personal communications. And so I was very interested in the technical aspects of this, because I doubted, and my sense is that this could be done in 1963. If you look at the cameras, this is a fully transistorized camera. It comes with a backpack transmitter, so that you don't have to have a cable going back to a videotape recorder. And this device was available in 1962 by a company that regularly supplied the military with all kinds of camera equipment. And as I also indicated, there is some photographic evidence that exists that may possibly show one of these individuals. If you'd like some information of that, I'm prepared to do that.
I think that would be helpful. You also indicate on page 5 that he had mentioned to you that he was allowed by a letter from the military to discuss some things in relation to his duties on the day of the assassination. It would obviously be in the interest of the board, since you report that a connection exists between this individual, the military establishment, and the assassination, to be able to know the name of that individual, so it would be possible to try to secure whatever copy of the letter may have existed that would have been written to him by the military.
What I will do, sir, is probably seek some counsel on that to ensure that I myself do not get into a situation here that is liable for something. And I will be glad to consider that for you. I was going to, let me go on record saying I was going to ask that individual for that document in the videotape session, but because of cut everything off, I was not able to actually do that document. So I had to just go from my recollection as I made my notes.
One final question for you, if I may, Mr. Osborne. Would your view be that this commission, or this board rather, excuse me, should undertake to disclose the names, identities of both living as well as deceased informants, agents, and intelligence operatives of the United States government?
That certainly is a gray area, and the problem with if we are dealing with the intelligence community here in this time, they certainly have at their disposal, shall we say, executive privilege, and the rules are a little bit different when dealing with these types of people, because they can claim national security. I think national security a lot of times can mean more than one thing. It can mean security of our nation from its people being up in arms over something that the government, or people within the government have done. And so I think they really use the term national security quite widely. And I would fully expect that if there were individuals from the intelligence community involved, that they'll do everything in their power. Like I mentioned before, they're very adept at covering up. So that's a gray area, because we don't know if these persons were really involved, and they may be saying these are operatives that we can't afford to let their names go. So it's going to have to be analyzed. I used to think that it would be nice to have been a member of this board after hearing what's going on today, and I think I'm kind of glad that you.
Well, it would be fair to say that any effort to pursue the line of inquiry that you had set out would turn directly on an evidentiary and documentary basis on being able to know the name of the individual. And in as much as you have indicated that person is known to you by name, there is some responsibility, I would think, to be able to assist the board in this matter.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to ask this question with respect to the letter that this young man received, saying what he could say about his actions. Was this cover that he was being given? Was this a story that was being laid upon him so that he would have an answer when people ask, what are you doing?
I don't believe so. I believe this had been received by him a number of years later.
Oh, I see.
Yes, this was a number of years later that these things were no longer certain things.
I see.
And I never got into the exact details. I just assumed that the things he was telling me were things that that I could know. So I'm sorry, I'm not clear exactly what that letter says. Or if it needs to.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Public hearing will stand in recess until promptly the hour of 2 p.m. It will return and reconvene at that time. Thank you very much. We'll reconvene this public hearing of the Assassination Records Review Board with our next witness.
Dr. Tenbrink, Dr. Philip Tenbrink.
My name is Philip Tenbrink. I'm an emergency room physician from Terrible, Indiana. And I'm here today to maybe provide some additional insight in your quest to unify all the records and maybe provide more insight into this tragedy in America. For 30 years, the American people really have not had an opportunity to have the full truth. The basis of a democratic society is a trust relationship between its leaders, its intelligence officials, and its citizens. And without that trust, it puts us at a grave disservice. To look at the Kennedy assassination as a single event, instead of looking at all the geographical parameters, geopolitical things happening at the time, is to kind of put on very tough vision. And with 4 governments turning over within a 60-day period inside the free world, it may represent other outside forces at work. But what I'm really interested in this committee looking at, since you should have the ability to explore these records, is to look with regards to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which seemed to cause a great deal of concern around the world. And President Kennedy's decision-making was the one who was responsible for the decisions and the outcome. And not a lot of people were really happy with the outcomes. And if it happened that some of the information he was given was truthful and some wasn't fully revealed, it could give the impression to members inside of his own military council that he was a man of poor judgment. And specifically, what I'd like you to look at is the briefings that were provided for the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and National Security Council with respect to the briefings on the convertibility of the Cuban bases from a 3-day period from a defensive site to an offensive site. It seems that Kenneth Keating, the senator from New York who's on the committee, seems to take a great deal of conflict with Robert Kennedy over who knows what, who knows when in response to that decision making. But if the president wasn't informed that these defensive sites were convertible within 3 days to offensive sites, it might explain why we as a nation were not prepared to find offensive sites in place in October 6 weeks later and hadn't had any U-2 flights to look for that. But that's one area where I think you might want to look to see once it's possibly conflict with the CIA had resulted in failure to properly inform the president. Since that would involve interpretation, the president wasn't a rocket scientist, he wouldn't understand the difference between a defensive patent and an offensive missile patent. The second area, which I think might be helpful to look, is with respect to the missile crisis that was occurring in the Middle East at the same time, where nuclear material from Germany was going to Egypt, and Nasser was threatening to annihilate the Jewish state with chemical, biological, and atomic weapons. This would put people who had just come through a great Holocaustic experience under a great deal of stress. And when the President of the United States responds to what are you going to do about this, well, we can send you some missiles to deal with B-52 bombers. It doesn't quite maybe address the situation enough to defuse the problem. But I think if you could look into the deal of the Nuclear Regulatory Committee and find out how it was that the Galen organization could get their hands on nuclear material to send it to Egypt, it might shed some insight into who was stimulating this kind of crisis. The third thing I'd like to talk about or have you explored is why the Secret Service would be responsible for repairing a leased car. The automobile in which the president was riding in was not U.S. government property, but was leased from Ford Motor Company. And why are they ordering parts to repair a car that's been damaged in an accident? And why do they order 2 windshields? Why by mistake? As an emergency room physician, I frequently take care of victims of gunshots. And it seems pretty clear to me, from what I can see from the emergency room physician's treatment and previous experience, that any bullet that struck the president in the throat and exited in his back would have continued in the rearward direction. And the most likely object right behind him is the follow-up car of the Secret Service. It would be interesting to look at the order forms for where they ordered the new windshields to see once if indeed the windshield that they should have returned but kept in the back of the car. And the fourth thing I think would be helpful would be to look at individuals that might have been out of the country during a particular time period where this might have been planned. If you were to plan an assassination of the President of the United States inside the U.S. or U.S. soil, you could be charged. But if you were off-site, in another foreign country, the United States has no legal jurisdiction. It turns out that Dick Nixon disappears for 3 days in June on his world peace tour. He leaves Egypt on June the 24th and shows up in the Vatican on June the 27th. But where is he for those 3 days? Many people have suggested that he may have played a role in it. But if he disappears, where'd he go? You folks have been given the trust and the authority of the United States Congress to investigate these issues, search for these records, and maybe finding those records could share some insight into this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Century. Further questions? Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony.
Is Mr. De Benedictis here? Okay. Dr. Aguilar? Okay, why don't we ask Mr. John McLaughlin.
Welcome, Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to straighten out the record. I use John McLaughlin as my pseudonym, as my author pseudonym. My real name is John McLaughlin. And I've quick synopsis or background. I'm a graduate of Harvard University. I was classmates, ironically, of both Al Gore, Tunney, and Jones. And I grew up in the city of Miami, Florida. My only other connection to the assassination investigation is I also enjoy Lee Harvey Oswald's favorite game, John
Could we just have the spelling of your name?
Sure. It's B as in boy, E, V as in Victor, I-L-A-Q-U-A. I'm currently an independent computer consultant, and I use computerized database management and analysis techniques for New England corporations as well as applied to the Kennedy assassination. The material I've developed, which I only have 3 copies of, but I'd like to circulate it now. It's a document I developed with the help of a lead that Mary Farrell gave me. Mary Farrell has reviewed this document, which is titled Red Scares, White Power, and Blue Death, and called it possibly the most interesting and significant piece of material she's written in the past several years. It's based on both personal observation and experience in Miami, Florida with anti-Castro Cuban exiles in 1966 and the 30th November movement, as well as the investigations that I've carried out in the ensuing years. A summary of what I believe to be the 2 most significant intelligence connections as a result of all my research center on both the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee Senator Thomas Dodd and Senator James Eastland, and the House Un-American Activities Committee, chaired until his death in the early 60s by Representative Francis E. Walter of Pennsylvania and Richard Aarons, who was the chief counsel. In particular, I'm focusing also on the former chief counsel of Joe McCarthy's CISC, as well as, I believe, Senator Dodd's CISC, Robert Morris, who's still alive today in Pennsylvania. Mr. Morris shared a summer home in Miami with me on Northwest 15th Street, as well as also on Northwest 15th Street at 3638 Northwest 15th Street was a safe house for Alpha 66, 30th Member Movement. On November the 16th of 1963, my father overheard several conversations in Spanish. He happens to have a master's degree in Spanish. He translated those conversations and reported to the City of Miami Police Intelligence Division the fact that Cubans in our neighborhood were talking about going to Dallas and doing something with President Kennedy. I wrote an article under the name of Michael Kensington, which appeared in the third decade in November of 1992, I believe, which has been reviewed and researched by both Jerry Rose, Gordon Winslow, and other people for its veracity. And they have both concluded that it's basically accurate and correct account of what occurred. At the same time, the Miami Police Intelligence Division was examining and investigating the reports about Joseph A. Miltier, which everybody is probably fairly familiar with. And they put my father's report in the same category, and I believe that either the Joe Miltier incident or my father's report resulted in the infamous airtel of November 17th of 1963 sent out by the FBI describing imminent plans of, I quote, an extremist revolutionary group who were planning to take action against Kennedy in Dallas. Perhaps they didn't mention Dallas, but sometime between the 17th and some unnamed date. I don't know if your power or authority extends to agencies like the City of Miami Police Intelligence Division, but I've had absolutely no luck in recovering any of the lead-up information, either related to the Joe Miltier incident or to my father's incident, regarding the two reports of assassination plots that originated from South Florida between November 9th, which was the Miltier incident, and November 16th or 17th, which was my father's reported incident. Following the leads from Alpha 66 into the World Anti-Communist League, I first investigated both the Senate National Security Subcommittee and UAC. In particular, the two incidents that I would request additional documentation or release relates to Peter Dale Scott's reference to Senator Thomas J. Dodd's direct request to Oswald to purchase the Mannlicher Carcano from Klein's Sporting Goods in Chicago. I believe that B. Harvey Oswald was quite possibly an agent of the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, and he was doing the bidding of Dodd and Eastland and Morris. I'm drying out. It's difficult to do. Secondarily, the incident surrounding the Clinton, Louisiana visit of B. Harvey Oswald on an allegedly exploratory mission regarding voter registration and the difficulty or the ease with which an outsider could register to vote compared to that of a local Louisiana resident who was a member of a minority. Also was requested by Dodd and further helped implicate B. Harvey Oswald on his own. It was almost self-implication, as was the Klein's Sporting Goods. On the UAC side, I'm related to a lead that was given to me by Mary Farrell, and it's up to her, I think, to decide whether or not she wants to disclose who it was that gave her this piece of information. This gentleman is a soldier of fortune, not well-known soldier of fortune in South Florida, indicated to her that the most significant leads that had to be explored involved Thomas F. Ellis, who's currently on the Council of National Policy. He's alive and apparently very well. He's on the Council of National Policy with Oliver J. North, Nelson Bunker Hunt, and Elton Oxner Jr., who's the son of Dr. Elton Oxner, who was part of Inca in New Orleans. I've also looked at why Richard Aarons was fired from UAC. And I found that the reason Richard Aarons was fired was because he worked for an organization called the Draper Committees and the Draper Genetics Committees, which is part of the Pioneer Fund. And the thing that concerns me about the Pioneer Fund is even today, I've traced them back to 1924, even today, they're in California with Proposition 187 sponsoring it. They're the main sponsors and financial backers of Prop 187, which is the anti-immigration issue. They sponsored William Shockley's research into the genetic inferiority of minorities, as well as Arthur Jensen's research into the inheritable composition of intelligence, as opposed to the environmental, which they say does not exist. They backed Richard Herrnstein and the Bell Curve. They were involved in 1937. They went over to Germany and helped Hitler and Goebbels write the laws against the prevention of hereditary ill progeny, which essentially became the Holocaust justification laws. They were involved with involuntary sterilization programs in Virginia. They were involved with the original anti-immigration legislation in 1924, which also was designed to keep Central European minorities, particularly targeted groups, from entering this country. We move further and follow them as they develop into the World Anti-Communist League through the Alpha 66 connections, and all of a sudden you find that four of the past presidents of the World Anti-Communist League all have significant ties by researchers into the assassination. Ray S. Klein was in Taiwan between 1958 and 1962. He's still alive, working at Georgetown University Center for Prestige and International Studies. He was there when Oswald was there at the Pingtong Marine Base. I'd like to find out what, if anything, the CIA is willing to release regarding the alleged mind control experiments that went on in Taiwan. Yaroslav Stetsko was another president of the World Anti-Communist League. He was Svasti Reiken's immediate superior and his immediate boss in the anti-Bolshevik nations. John Singlov and Roger Pearson were also involved and very directly related to not only activities in the Pioneer Fund, but also to activities at the World Anti-Communist League. Another word on Thomas F. Ellis. He first gained his fame and recognition as campaign chairman for the 1972 Jesse Helms senatorial campaign, and he's been involved quite directly in both Carolina politics as well as U.S. politics. I'd also find out if there's anything that can be done regarding quasi-private agencies. I don't know if your jurisdiction also extends into this area. Things like the American Security Council and the Liberty Lobby and Council for National Policy, unfortunately, which are primarily private agencies, but have full-time active, employees of the government also involved. I believe that is as complete and as short a summary as I can possibly make of necessarily a 70-page document. And I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to at least appear before you and say something.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Any questions?
You made an attempt to get any documents from the UAC or the Senator General Committee?
I haven't yet submitted any actual FOIAs. I have submitted a FOIA.
They're not subject to FOIA.
They're not.
But you can get some of the documents.
And how could you do that?
Well, some of the records are in the National Archives. Most of them you have to give to the various congressional committees or the Secretary of the Senate. But I just wondered if you had made an attempt to do that.
No, I haven't yet. I requested military records of Wycliffe P. Draper, who was head of the Draper Committee and head of the Pioneer Fund before he died. He was an Army intelligence. In World War II, he fought on our side. In World War I, he fought on the British side, for whatever reason. But it's a new enough lead and an interesting enough be, but we haven't yet had the chance to do a lot of work.
Thank you very much.
Just one quick question. Is your father still living?
Yes, he is. I'm sure he can't travel, but I'm sure if someone would like to discuss it with him, I'm sure he'd be able to cooperate.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to thank the review board for allowing the opportunity to speak and explain my trend. I often find that it's useful to two heads are better than one, and the purposes of my presentation today. And I'd also like to apologize for a copy of the letter that I sent to Mr. David Morwell, Secretary of that. In any case, my name is Gary Aguilar. I'm a practicing ophthalmologist in San Francisco. I am on the faculty of the University of California, San Francisco. I'm a faculty at Stanford University Medical Center. I'm the chairman of the Department of Surgery at St. Francis Memorial Hospital, and have, I think, more of an academic interest in this than anything else. I campaigned against Jack Kennedy as young as I may seem. My parents were staunchly opposed to him, and I carried a placard from him. In any case, I come here before you today to request something that should be in a letter which I have sent on numerous occasions. I have to make a couple of amendments to it, only because some other information has become available. The first issue that I care to raise is, and it is title number 1. I don't know if you have copies of it. I have one copy here, but I have my laptop with me. I can run off copies of it. Okay. Is agency file, restricted file pertaining to Pierre Fink. It is agency file number 06165. I hold it in my hand here, and for reasons that baffle me, Pierre Fink, it should be known by all, is one of the autopsy pathologists and is the only forensically trained autopsy pathologist. It is baffling to me that a document pertaining to anything that he has done or said would be restricted. It's apparently 6 pages in length, and the requesting authority that be restricted to the CIA, as I understand it, according to this document here. Should I leave this with you? I think I already sent a full copy of all of these. Okay, I think I sent copies already, but if you didn't have them, I thought I'd bring additional copies. The specific puzzling issue to me from an academic standpoint and from a medical standpoint is that the original autopsy report insists that the wound that killed Jack Kennedy, the bullet that killed Jack Kennedy, entered the skull to the right and just above the external occipital protuberance. I thought I'd bring the skull because it would most nicely explain exactly where that location is. The knob in the back of the head is the external occipital protuberance. It is right here. That is the knob that you feel at the base of your skull. To the right of the external occipital protuberance, and slightly above, is about this location. And before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, Dr. Humes, Boswell, and Fink labeled the skull and labeled dots in these 3 locations. That was to identify the external occipital protuberance, and they basically marked this. It was then determined on the basis of photographic and X-ray evidence, which has been called into question, that in fact the wound was not here. It was at the parotid bone here. The difference in size here is 10 centimeters, and it is a huge error for even a first-year resident to have made on the skull location. It places it in a different bone, and it's the kind of thing that a first-year pathology resident would have been failed by one of his professor pathologists for having made a professor like Fink, who in fact was the director of the forensic section at the AFIP at that time. In any case, I would like to request that this document be released if that is possible to do so. Number 2 is, and I do not have a copy of this with me. I cover my files. I know I have it someplace. I'm moving files, but in any case, there was a complete transcription of an interview with Pierre Fink, and I have the case record, or the record number here. It's an AG file. The copy of the interview, which I have received, and I've reviewed this with other people, they have exactly sentence of my copy appears in the middle of page 12, and it reads, quote, "Do you think it's possible that in the course of preparing this report, recognizing the limitations that you had without photographs, things like that, do you think that it's possible that that measurement relative to the occipital protuberance that's contained within the," and it trails off, that's it, right, mid-sentence. So there must be something there that might, and presumably Dr. Fink was at that point going to answer this question about something about the external occipital protuberance, and of course that has great relevance to the findings of the autopsy report. There was Audrey Bell, item number 3, Parkland nurse Audrey Bell. I have the HSCA record number for you. Apparently she prepared a diagramming fragments of bullets which she saw that has never been seen. It's a small matter. I think if that is available anywhere, it would be nice to track that piece of information if we could. Item number 4, possible complete photographic record of the autopsy. And I've listed this under 4A and 4B in the remarks that I sent along to you. Number 4A refers to agency record number, wherein on page 8, Dr. Fink notes, quote, "I helped the Navy photographer to take photographs of the occipital wound, internal and external aspects, as well as," and it goes on, "but there's no such photograph of a wound." Now, it has been argued by some that the photographs of the back of the head, which show the scalp intact, are in fact the photographs that he was directing be taken. But Fink didn't think that, and it was only became apparent in recently released documents, in fact, that Fink was convinced that those photographs were not in fact the photographs that he had taken, raising questions about at least the completeness of the photographic record and nothing else. I have been incidentally to the archives and seen the original autopsy photographs, and so I've seen what it was that he was being shown before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the originals. Now, just to go on here, he had an exchange with Dr. Petty regarding the photographs at the back of the head, in which he said, Dr. Petty asked him, because they were looking at these photographs, well, aren't these the ones, Dr. Petty asked him? Dr. Petty, if I understand you correctly, Dr. Fink, you wanted particularly to have a photograph made of the external aspect of the skull from the back to show that there was no cratering to the outside of the skull. Dr. Fink, absolutely. Did you ever see such a photograph? Fink, I don't think so, and I brought with me memorandum referring to the examination of photographs in 1967 when I was recalled from Vietnam. I was asked to look at the photographs, and as I recall, there were 2 blank 4x5 transparencies. In other words, 2 photographs that had been exposed but with no image, and as I can recall, I never saw pictures of the outer aspect of the wound of entry in the back of the head and the inner aspect of the skull in order to show the cratering. Although I was there asking for these photographs, I don't ever remember seeing those photographs. Now, this went on again in another exchange, which was, I think, even more to the point. The point about the photographs is that when a bullet enters, it causes beveling, and that is, like a BB hitting a window, you have a very tiny point of entry, and then the exit side, on the other side of the window, or the other side of the skull, as the case may be, you have a much larger wound, and that helps to establish the direction of the shot, and would also, presumably, if such photographs were available, help identify whether they were actually talking about the external occipital protuberance or whether the wound was higher than that. Counsel Andy Purdy asked him, he said, we have here a black and white blow-up of the same spot, and at that time he was showing the back of the scalp with a scalp intact. You previously mentioned that your intent here was to photograph the crater. I think that was the word you used. Fink answered, in the bone, not in the scalp. Because to determine the direction of the projectile, the bone is a very good source of information. So I emphasize the photographs of the crater seen from inside the skull, which are showing me is soft tissue wound in the scalp. So it's clear that he's talking about having taken photographs that weren't there, that when he was showing the photographs. Under 4B, I go on into a lengthy listing of individuals, and I don't think I'll recount it here for the time constraints that you have. Suffice it to say that John Stringer, who's the autopsy photographer, Floyd Reedy, who was his associate, Commander Humes, Boswell, and Dr. Carney all recalled having taken photographs of the interior of the chest. Now, these are mutually corroborated photographs, and presumably they would have taken 2 black and whites at a minimum, and 2 colors at a minimum. There are 4 images there. And probably they would have taken more than that, and one would guess that there are many more photographs from that section. That has relevance as to whether one can see the point of entry in, if they were indenting the interior of the body with a probe while they're taking the photograph, as Dr. Carney suggests, who was a pathologist who was there, and may have some relevance to the path of the bullet. Under item number 5, Dr. Humes testified to the Warren Commission. Yes, sir, these are various notes in longhand, or copies rather of various notes in longhand made by myself, in part during the performance of the examination of the late president, and in part after the examination when I was preparing to have a typewritten report made. Now, what he's referring to is the notes of the autopsy that he had at the time. Now, he has said, and the amendment that I need to make here is that he has said both to the Journal of the American Medical Association and to the House Select Committee on Assassination that he did destroy some autopsy notes. So we don't know which ones he had and which ones he didn't have, but presumably he had some autopsy notes. And in fact, Dr. Carr and I, under something which I'll submit to you separately, also recall there having had autopsy notes. These autopsy notes have never been seen. The only autopsy note we have is Dr. Boswell's face sheet diagram, and the face sheet diagram, in fact, tends to prove that the entrance point was low in the skull. The way that it proves that is easily seen in the skull, and that is that the autopsy diagram that Fink prepared shows something that says 17 centimeters missing, with the words missing on it. If one takes a skull and disarticulates it, as I have here, and shows the most anterior portion for the exit to have been was just above the hairline. In other words, you'd have seen it, there's a bullet hole coming out here in the autopsy photographs, even in the course that many of you may have seen, you don't see a bullet hole coming out. So presumably it was right about the hairline, and of course Jack Kennedy fortunately had a lower hairline than I do. In any case, it was at about this point. Now, if one measures from the lowest point that could have been, for the exit to have been 4 centimeters above the supraorbital ridge, backwards, he said 17 centimeters missing. Now, I talked to Dr. Boswell about this, and he put a centimeter ruler back there. 17 centimeters back at this point puts you spot on the external protuberance. I can demonstrate it for a ruler, with the ruler if anybody cares to see it, but I've done it many times. Now, if in fact the entrance wound and the defect was that much higher, this distance from here to that exit point is only about 12 to 13 centimeters. So he basically has biangulated the wound to this low point. But the photographs are missing that would help establish that it was there. And since that was a contemporaneously prepared diagram, now, the confusing thing here is that in the autopsy report, it describes the defect as being 13 centimeters, not 17 centimeters. Well, Dr. Boswell told the House Select Committee on Assassinations, told Harrison Livingston, and told me on the phone on March 30th of this year that it was 17 centimeters when the body arrived, and then he found got a bone fragment in. He put the bone fragment back in place. And with the bone fragment back in place, the defect was in fact then 13 centimeters. Now, to illustrate what I'm talking about, here is a photograph. These are the diagrams from the Warren Commission, and they're in color, very nice ones. Here is the way that they diagrammed that. Okay, this is 13 centimeters across here. But in fact, when the body first arrived, according to what he told me on the phone, and I have a recorded conversation with this fragment of bone was not there. This fragment of bone was absent, and in fact, there was a hole extending all the way from the entrance point forward 17 centimeters, which would have to place the wound, the defect, quite low in the rear of the skull, placing some forensics problems for the reconstruction of the shooting. In any case, under item number 6, there is a segment from Dr. Fink in which, in the last page of the gross examination of a formalin-fixed brain, and I have the agency file number there, there are, on the 5th page of this document, which is titled Personal Notes Used for the Text Sent with Letter of 1 February 1965 to Brigadier General Blumberg, AFIP Director, there are 5 lines blacked out of Dr. Fink's first paragraph. I have that to show you, and I will hold it up for others to see. And here we have that document, and here it is. It's all medical, and there all these lines are blacked out. And Dr. Humes called me on the 29th of November. It's basically dealing with how he was called and so on and so forth. But those lines are blocked out, and I can't think of a national security reason for excluding that. Now, the final issue I'd like to raise.
Mr. Ed, before you want, can I see that?
Sure. I mean, some of this may have been released in the meantime. I don't know. These are the copies that I have of it, but I'll be happy to show it to you. anything has been released that I'm requesting, I apologize for not knowing. By the time it gets out San Francisco, the information gets out San Francisco. Do you have any questions regarding that, Mr. Hall?
No, if you could just proceed.
Okay, all right.
I'm going to listen and read at the same time.
You reminded me. Under item number 7, there were some recent revelations, and for this I brought copies to give to you. I have 3 copies for you, and I could make more were needed, but 3 copies I'll pass to you. As I mentioned, JFK's pathologists, James Humes and J. Thornton Boswell, described the entrance to the President's skull wound as being to the right and just above the external occipital protuberance in the original autopsy report. They repeated that assertion in an interview published in the Journal of the American Medical Association on May 27, 1992. On November 17, 1993, Dr. Gerald Posner, the author of the book Case Closed, reported to the Conyers Committee that he had interviewed both Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell, and apparently at approximately the same time they were interviewed by the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1992. Mr. Posner reported that Drs. Humes and Boswell told him that JFK's skull wound was not low near the rear, near the external occipital protuberance, but rather it was high in the President's skull. Mr. Posner indicated during his testimony to Representative Conyers that he would ask Dr. Humes and Boswell for permission to release information on his interviews with them, but he has not done so to my knowledge. On March 30th of this year, I myself called both Drs. Humes and Boswell to inquire about Mr. Posner's report that there was a surprising turnabout on this important question. Dr. Humes indicated to me that he stood firmly by his statements in JAMA. Dr. Boswell also told me that he had never changed his mind about the low location of JFK's skull wound. Moreover, Dr. Boswell told me that he had never spoken with Mr. Posner. I have a recording of this, and I'd be happy to leave it with you if you like. As I spoke with both pathologists 4.5 months after Mr. Posner's claim, I'm baffled at this discrepancy. In any case, that Jack Kennedy's pathologist might be inconsistent and reliable about the President's skull wounds is of enormous evidentiary significance, I believe. Their claims about JFK's fatal wound, which contradict Mr. Posner's assertions, have been published in a peer-reviewed medical journal in the Journal of the American Medical Association, and if JAMA's representations are not reliable, much light is shed on the ambiguities of the autopsy findings. I respectfully request that you ask Mr. Posner, as he has already offered to do before Congress, to produce the copies of all records he possesses in his interviews with Drs. Humes and Boswell. As a physician who has an interest in this case, I think from an academic standpoint, I thank you very much for the time you've allowed me, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you. And could I give you a copy of this? And I've highlighted them. In fact, just for the purposes of the... well, can I read from this one, and then I'll give it to you as I need. I'd like to read, in fact, from Mr. Posner's testimony so that there are no ambiguities about precisely what he said. On the bottom of page 112 of this document, and I need to explain the pages that follow page 112 and 113. On the bottom of page 112, it was during the testimony of Dr. Randy Robertson. Mr. Posner essentially interrupted that testimony of Dr. Robertson because Dr. Robertson was discussing the fact that the autopsy pathologist placed the skull wound low. Mr. Posner interrupted to say, I have interviewed the autopsy doctor. This is a quote now. I have interviewed the autopsy doctors. I have interviewed Mr. O'Neill. What is left here on the record today should not be allowed because it is not correct, which is the implication that the autopsy doctors agree with their original drawings in 1963. That they agree with the original drawings in 1963, and of course they do. Which were made without the benefit of x-rays. That's not true. They had x-rays, they looked at x-rays, and photographs. To the credit of the House Select Committee on Assassinations and Congressman Stokes, that committee did a superb job on forensics in this case. It was the work of that committee that had the 2 autopsy physicians change their mind that they had been mistaken about the placement of the wound here. In fact, it's equivocal. Dr. Boswell told me he doesn't believe that Humes caved in on the question of the wound being higher, but reading Humes' testimony, after having been harangued, Boswell would never change his mind. Fink would never change his mind, but Humes came back and said, well, maybe that's what it is on the photograph. But still has never said that the wound was any place other than low. In any case, he says here, and I quote again, "I have spoken to them," and he had just mentioned Hughes and Boswell, "about this, and they have confirmed their change of testimony that they gave before the House Select Committee on Assassinations." Now, they had just told the Journal of American Medical Association, presumably that the wound was low, and now he is saying that they confirmed to him that they had changed it and made this wound high. Enormous error. James Lassar asked a question about Mr. Posner's releasing these documents, and Mr. Posner says, and I quote again, "I would be happy, Mr. Chairman, to ask Drs. Humes and Boswell if they would agree for their notes to be released to the National Archives." This occurred on November 17th. I called Dr. Boswell on March 30th, 4.5 months later, and at that time he had not yet spoken to him for the first time, so presumably he had not asked him to release notes. And now, I don't know, and I'm not accusing Mr. Posner of misrepresenting the truth here. I don't know what the truth is, but I think that if Mr. Posner can convincingly demonstrate that the doctors are unreliable about this, I think it has some great value to this.
Thank you. Other questions for Dr. Angola? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It'll take me a minute to
Mr. Hal Berg. Give Dr. Aguilar just a second to put his head together.
That's your copy.
I gotta get my head together.
Would that it were this easy most of the time.
You have the witness representative, if they're not in business.
A-G-U-I.
I know, I've got the next one. He was on the list.
Mr. Verb, we didn't have you on the list ahead of time. Could you spell your name for me?
Yes, my name is Hal, H-A-L, and the last name is Berg. That's like pronoun subject. B as in Victor, E-R-B as in boy.
Go ahead, sir. Thank you.
I'm from San Francisco. I'm a private researcher. I've been conducting research for about 30 years. In fact, almost from the very first day of the assassination, because it was a tremendous event in American history, still unresolved in my mind, and still unresolved in the minds of most of the American public. That's why I'm here, and that's why you are here. I'm here as a private citizen who is deeply concerned to know the full truth about the assassination of President Kennedy. Today, I wish to call attention to a serious question that has long lingered about the event, and that is precisely the accused assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, and his alleged association, connection, or involvement with the U.S. government as a possible agent or an agency or agencies that represented the U.S. government. Regardless of whether one believes or asserts that there was no conspiracy or there was a conspiracy, the unresolved question of Oswald's ties to the U.S. government looms large and indeed hangs over us like a proverbial Damocles sword, and that is over all of us, including the U.S. government, whether the U.S. government is in any way connected or not. Now, I realize fully well that virtually no government reveals its agents or its methods of operation. But in the matter of the President Kennedy's death, this question can no longer be ignored, and the longer it is avoided, the greater the harm that will befall us all. To focus the attention of the review board more closely in this regard, I specifically call your attention to a radio program that I appeared on in December 1966, which was several hours long and concerned the Kennedy murder. I was in the radio station studio. This was in Oakland, California. And the other half of the program was a telephone hookup to a Maryland writer and researcher, Harold Weisberg, who had written and began a series of books called Whitehorse Series. At the end of the program moderator received a call from an individual who did not wish to be heard on the radio and who stated he wished to speak only to Mr. Weisberg confidentially. Now, I was able to hear the contents of this discussion, the entire discussion between Mr. Weisberg and Mr. Kohler. And the phone call from the individual who insisted that he not be identified and who wanted to remain anonymous. In fact, Weisberg asked the individual, if you desire to come forward, you always know how to reach me, but this individual never did step forward. I'm going to go into what the nature of this call was. The gist of the phone call was this. The caller had been a barracks roommate of Lee Harvey Oswald, who was stationed at El Toro Marine Corps Base in California. The caller stated that about 2 weeks before Oswald received his so-called alleged hardship discharge, which is all in the record, and he he was constantly in the CID headquarters being briefed for a mission overseas. The caller provided the information that Oswald also had a crypto secret clearance. Now, I raise this matter because if indeed the CID was involved in such an event, I'm not here to state flatly that they did engage in this. I don't know. I want the evidence to be presented. It would necessarily follow that the ONI, which is the Office of Naval Intelligence, must certainly have been aware of this. Just boggles my mind. I had one time served in an intelligence section during the Korean War, and it's impossible for me to believe the CID could not have had in some way connection or approval by the ONI. I mention ONI because there is a lot of speculation in the literature, some of which you may have read, you may not have, and none of the speculation has proven to be final. And this speculation is pointing to Oswald being connected in some capacity with the ONI. Other writers will suggest FBI, CIA. My concern here is with the ONI. Recently, Professor John Newman, who has appeared, I believe, at the last hearing, he's been looking into this matter and has stated that a significant portion of the ONI files relative to JFK have been destroyed. There are still remaining, however, at least 2 boxes of ONI files that still have to be gone through. I have not myself seen these, so I do not know what the nature of those files consist of. I believe it is incumbent upon this board to reach a fairly definitive determination as to why, when, and how these ONI files were destroyed and whose responsibility it was for the destruction. Since ONI files necessarily involve the Navy Department, it appears evident that those individuals from the Secretary of the Navy on downward and those immediately below charged with their necessary responsibilities be asked precisely about the issues and points raised in my statement today. If this is not done, history will not be served, and the American people will once again, as in prior investigations, be the ultimate loser. Respectfully, that is I will be willing to send you this entire statement, a letter, which I will forward to the board. And I will answer any questions that you have about this.
Thank you, Mr. Burrs. Questions?
Yes, what do you mean, Mr. Berg, by crypto security?
Well, a crypto secret clearance has to do, as the caller explained, I didn't get into it further. Actually, crypto secret clearance is mentioned in the Warren Commission documents, in its actual Warren Commission volumes. I found that out after having looked into it. You can find them. Crypto secret clearance is a very specialized, high security clearance that very, very few people would obtain in any capacity. And it's interesting to note that at this time, when Oswald was in the Marine Corps, he was receiving, quote, communist literature. So you have a pro-communist Marxist having crypto secret clearance. I talked to a general who was an aide to President Kennedy, who accompanied President Kennedy. I asked him about crypto secret clearance. He knew about it. He said, I have not confirmed this, that the only way that you could obtain crypto secret clearance is that you had to have first top secret clearance. Crypto secret clearance had to do with black box stuff, which is the information provided when atomic warhead missiles in case of atomic attack. I understand the Strategic Air Command has capacity for this kind of information. I don't know precisely the nature of it, I haven't looked into it further. But I've spoken to people who have had crypto secret accounts. Many people, in fact, that I've spoken to, who have pretty much asserted that what I have learned through this broadcast and other means turns out to be fairly accurate. And I only go by what I can document. I'm not interested in speculation. I do not go by hearsay to the extent that I simply believe every single theory. I want documentation to prove what can be clearly said in the record and determined to be the truth.
Have you made requests of the United States government?
No, I have not. I have not. In fact, I've never issued a single FOIA request in the years that I've been doing this, although I have relied on other FOIA requests from other individuals, not necessarily connected with this particular issue, but I've interviewed people who would be in a position to know precisely what this kind of clearance was and the nature of ONI and related matters.
Well, the issue that you raise, of course, is one that goes to availability or the destruction of materials held by the United States government.
Exactly.
May I ask why you decided or have foregone the opportunity to use the Freedom of Information Act?
To be quite honest, I'm primarily involved in so many other areas. My area that I've been looking into is photographic evidence, and that takes an enormous amount of time. I write letters and receive letters. In fact, I should mention one important thing that may go to the heart of the matter. I recently received a call from a person who took Oswald's place in the Marine Corps in his very position after he left and went to Soviet Russia. I hope to be in communication with this person and find out precisely what the nature, if he knows anything at all about crypto secret clearance. So my answer would be I simply have not had the time to do this. It's very time. If you've been involved in this case, it's very time consuming. I have a full-time job every day. I'm not a member of any particular group or organization. Nobody's sponsoring me. All the money I've thrown into this is basically simply because I desire the truth. I think justice will be served. The truth is not.
Well, I do think it is the case that part of the board is interested in the efficacy and efficiency of the Freedom of Information Act as it relates to this matter. So my questions are directed to that issue, not directed necessarily to your personal.
I understand. Other questions? Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. We appreciate your being here today.
Mr. Thomas Neros.
Thank you very much.
Could you please just state and spell your name for the record?
Yes, my last name is Meros, M-E-R-O-S. I live and work in Cleveland, Ohio. And over the years, I've been coming to Dallas, Texas, and the first opportunity I had to bring my teenage children was May of '92. In May of '92, I took my children into the old courthouse. We were walking around, and I was trying to find the court room where Jack Ruby was tried. And somebody told me that that room was locked, it was disassembled, and it became a storage room. Well, the lady that told me that she had been at the Ruby trial, and she would be glad to talk to my children about that trial. So we went into her office, and she told my children a story that I videotaped. And for a half hour, I listened to this story. She told me, her name is Dee McCarroll, M-C-C-A-R-E-L-L. She is presently the administrative assistant for Judge Nikki DeShazo in the probate court here in Dallas. And she told me that in November of 1963, she had worked for the county recorder's office. The FBI came to the county recorder's office 1 week before the assassination, and they asked the county recorder to get all the documents, turn over to the FBI that contained the name Lee Harvey Oswald. She said nobody ever interviewed her about this before, and she's never told her story before. I have this on videotape, and I'll be glad to send it to you. She told me that they gathered up whatever they had, and the county recorder gave it to the FBI. Because she was assigned the task, her and another co-worker, they're only 21 years old at the time, they gave these documents to the FBI, whatever existed. This was during the week prior to the murder of President Kennedy. The day before the assassination, Jack Ruby came to the office of the county recorder and insisted upon seeing the county recorder. This was a Thursday. The county recorder did not come to work that day, and Jack Ruby hung around that office for almost the entire day because he wanted to see the county recorder. Now my questions are, was there a lease that was possibly recorded with the name of Lee Harvey Oswald here in Dallas County that may have had a co-signer on that lease that didn't want his name to be known? Could it possibly have been Jack Ruby who had co-signed for a lease when Oswald moved in out of Dallas to the different addresses he lived in Oak Cliff? Where are these documents today? Maybe the county recorder or his family knows. Of course, that was 30 years ago, and who even knows if they exist. But I have Dee McCarroll's address, the phone number, and she's in a mile from here. I brought my son back to Dallas on the 30th anniversary, which was a year ago. And on November 22nd, on the grassy knoll, we got to meet Jim Lavelle. Jim Lavelle was the detective who was wearing the white suit. And I find it kind of strange, he's wearing a white suit just about 8 days before December. He's the only man that, if you look at all the videotape of that weekend, the only person who wears a white suit. I asked him why he was wearing a white suit. He said, well, that was the only suit I had available, and that's what my wife laid out for me. Then I asked him why nobody took notes of Lee Harvey Oswald during the interrogation of Oswald for the 10 hours prior to his death. And he said, oh, we took notes. We took notes, he said. I said, what about your notes? He said, I still have my notes at home in my basement. I said, why didn't you turn them over to the Warren Commission? He said, nobody asked him for them. So if Officer Lavelle still has his notes as to what Lee Harvey Oswald had to say during his 10 hours of questioning before his own murder, I think that would be important for this board to find out. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Mr. Morris, thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate the help.
Mr. Lawrence Sutherland.
Mr. Sutherland, spell your name for our record.
Yes, it's Sutherland.
Lawrence with a W.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Lawrence Sutherland. I'm a private citizen and sometimes freelance writer. And I have written in the past on the subject of the Kennedy assassination. I come before the board today to urge the release of all documents, as have others, under government control relating to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. If required, and I rather suspect it will be, additional legislation should be enacted to accomplish this goal. Such a request for full disclosure has often been heard in the past and, of course, continues today. My perspective, however, is likely quite different from many who have addressed this board. I believe a full and complete disclosure of all heretofore secret documents will fail to overturn the Warren Commission's conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, killed President Kennedy. If I am wrong, then let the now hidden facts prove me wrong. The public deserves the truth. To be sure, the uncovering of new information on the assassination will hardly be enough to establish that there was no conspiracy. But it may, in some small measure, add to the credibility of government. The public deserves a government it can trust. Anything less than full disclosure of government documents will continue to allow doubts to be raised about who participated in the assassination. And for some, the answer of who may never be satisfactorily resolved no matter what is disclosed. But we should try. When public opinion polls consistently reveal high percentages of the American people, as high as 90%, believing there was a conspiracy, then there is even more need to open the files. That so many accede to a conspiracy notion is not surprising. In a wide range of media over the years, the public has had no shortage of outlets for pro-conspiracy viewpoints. Oliver Stone's propaganda in JFK is perhaps the most prominent avenue, but it's far from the only one. Bookstores, at least those in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, often offer half a dozen or more works espousing one conspiracy theory or another. All of these theories have given the American people a plethora, if you will, of mania. You have Badge Man and Umbrella Man and Daltex Man and Fake Oswald in Mexico City Man and something even, I believe you call it a manhole cover man. Now, it is right and proper that proponents of conspiracy theories be permitted to air their views. They may well be wrong, but they have every right to be wrong. The public's interests are best served, however, by a search for hard facts that stand up to scrutiny. One can only hope that the unreleased documents will aid in that search. To that end, the board should endeavor to open for public inspection all documents held by the House Select Committee on Assassinations. That committee, of course, concluded that there were 2 gunmen firing at the president. To quote from the 1979 final report, the various scientific projects indicated that there was a high probability that 2 gunmen were firing at the president. Scientifically, the second gunman was established only by the acoustical study. And as you may know, 3 years after the report was issued, the National Academy of Sciences issued its study, seriously undermining the acoustical study. Furthermore, much of the expert testimony before the House Select Committee, in my opinion, tends to downplay a conspiracy possibility. I would hope that the release of any additional documents of the House Select Committee might resolve questions about the committee's credibility. At the very least, we should open doors for knowledge about the assassination that have for too long remained closed.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Sutherland, do you believe that it ought to disclose the names of informants, agents, or others working under the protection of the government of the United States have information that bears upon the assassination, the disclosure of whose names might put in jeopardy themselves and their families?
I think that would be perhaps the only exception. I would not. But anything else, autopsy records, photographs, anything among the dozens of cubic feet of documents, I think should be released. But not in that particular instance.
Thank you, Mr. Senator. We appreciate your testimony.
Mr. Joseph Backus.
Good afternoon, Mr. Backus.
Hi. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman and panel members, for allowing me to speak today. I didn't think I'd get a chance.
We need you to spell your name.
My name is Joseph Backus, B-A-C-K-E-S. I'm from Albany, New York. I'm a private researcher into the case. I wanted to applaud the idea of lifting a gag order universally across the board for all intelligence agencies, and especially federal commissions who researched and looked into the assassination of President Kennedy, especially House Select Committee members would have a lot to say in this case. I also want to raise the issue of evidence being in the hands of private individuals and private corporations, and ask the review board how they would go about acquiring such material. I can corroborate that Detective Lavelle does have notes in regard to the interrogation of Lee Harvey Oswald. At Ask 92 on an eyewitness panel, he said as such, and the last sentence of that panel was Detective Lavelle saying, "I will not release mine." So if you start with him, I think we'll see a lot of notes on that interrogation suddenly start appearing. Several retired Dallas policemen have files and evidence relating to this case. So far, there have been 2 books from Dallas policeman Jesse Curry's assassination file. Recently, there's a book by Gary Savage, I believe, nephew of Rusty Livingston, who worked in the crime lab. This book is called First Day Evidence. Rusty Livingston would have a lot of evidence and files relating to the case that would be worth looking at. Specifically in that book, he worked in the crime lab. He mentions a camera which was used to take photographs of photographs. And he mentions that they were of such good quality that the photographs of photographs would pass for originals. I find that very interesting, and I would ask the review panel if somehow they could acquire that camera. I would like people with more scientific and photographic technical expertise than I have to examine that camera. I would like to look at documents of the Dallas Police Crime Lab, how many photographs they took, who saw them, where they went, were any used in as an original photograph. Did that get into the original official record and such? I would also like to know if the review panel has been in contact with organizations that have photographic evidence, like local television stations here in Dallas. The 6th Floor Museum has a lot of photographs. Southern Methodist University, Dallas Times-Herald, although no longer in existence as a newspaper, must have their archive somewhere. The Dallas Morning News, Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and things like that. How would you guys go about getting material from that, or would you need more specific information from someone like me asking the question?
Well, we simply are taking any input today that you might have, and those are good suggestions for us to follow up on, and we certainly can do that. Whatever precision you can provide to us in terms of the kinds of records that you think are there is helpful to us.
Along those lines, how much of an investigatory work would you do? Like if I have an opinion that there's a film or photograph at one of these places, and they come back to you or they deny it, or I'm not for certain that such a photograph may be there, but how much investigatory work would you do? Or would you throw that back on a researcher such as myself?
We certainly would make every effort to follow up, but it would be very helpful for us to know the basis for which you believe that there are photographs or records at the location that you're asking to see.
Okay. I would also ask to look into the National Photographic Interpretation Center, which was like the CIA's photo lab, basically. There are documents that they may have had this Zapruder film on the night of the assassination. So that's somewhat in dispute. Maybe it was a few days later or something. But that, in my opinion, would be part of their job. I would want them to look at it. And you know, that I'm sure there are honest people in the CIA, there are honest people in the FBI, and some of them are actually trying to do a respectable job and try and find out what happened. And some people say they're trying to mess around with photographic evidence. But to get the documents from these organizations and to know the names of the employees and who worked there, what the hierarchy was, who was whose boss, and exactly went on would be interesting to look at. Also, radio is something that is often overlooked as a source of valuable information. I would ask to look at the SEC if they have master copies of radio broadcasts that day. And similarly, like CBS News is kind of difficult to get material from. Basically, the policy is if they didn't air it, you can't see it. I think they have an archive in Fort Lee, New Jersey. That would be the #1 network I would ask the review board to pay attention to, especially outtakes of interviews. Like if it was 10 minutes on a national program, there must be 3 or 4 hours with that person that didn't get on television that must be stored on tape somewhere. That's basically it.
Mr. Backus, you described yourself as a private researcher. In the course of your research of the assassination, you identified these either public private cancer or that are restricted to government that you specifically just
the Dallas Police that I mentioned And I think that could start a snowball effect, because people don't want to be, out in the spotlight that they've been withholding documents for a long time. It's like, what about him, And don't look at me. This was something that maybe their boss, Chief Curry or Will Fritz, says not to talk about it, because at Bethesda also there was like a gag order to people like Floyd Reedy and Gerald Custer that David Lifton interviewed on film. You are not to discuss this, and you might be court-martialed if you do. There may have been something similar to that in the Dallas Police Department. I know for a fact that Detective LaBelle has notes on the interrogation of Lee Harvey Oswald, because he said so publicly, and I have it on videotape, and I'll mail that videotape of that panel conference to you. You can see for yourself. He says, I will not release mine. Well, if you don't have me, what are you talking about?
Further questions? I do have a question.
Yes.
It's a question we haven't had the occasion to pose today, but I'd like to pose in a brief compass. And that is to ask you whether, not as a matter of law or a matter of statutory authority, but as a matter of principle and good public policy, whether you believe it is appropriate for a federal agency, as an agency of the United States government, to take the property of private individuals.
I think this is going to be a difficult, probably your most difficult assignment in releasing documents. I'm a little bit annoyed at how private ownership has been held up as this sacred thing, especially with this Zapruder film, almost from day one. And I question that the Secret Service didn't say hand it over, and how the right of private ownership throughout this case, especially with the photographic evidence, has been used as a barrier to prevent honest research. And I would ask the review board if it's possible. I mean, they can keep the rights to the photographs, but I would like them to be made more public, more available. Maybe if you could somehow bend that, especially with organizations like CBS and Time Life, because I believe there was a system set up to acquire the photographs and put them in the hands of these corporations to prevent public access to it. No one saw the Zapruder film until 1975, 13 years later. So it was shown during the Garrison trial. But I would kind of ask if there's some way, when we have really important evidence like the Zapruder film or the Nix film, to kind of bend private ownership laws. They could have royalties or something, like a play. There are royalties to the writer, but you pay him a reasonable amount and you produce the show any way you want it. Something like that should happen with the photographs. I mean, pay the royalty to the owner, but the public should be allowed to look at them. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Backus.
Martin Shackelford.
Good afternoon, Mr. Shackelford.
Good afternoon. My name is Martin Shackelford. That's Shackelford. I'm a delinquency social worker in Michigan with a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Michigan. I studied the JFK case for 20 years. The primary focus on photographic evidence, and I also tried to keep up with literature on the case. Mr. Hall's been asking a question about ancient identities. My own feeling is that if an employee of the U.S. government has concealed information on this case, has covered up the facts in the case, the American public has a right to know who that person is. So in that type of situation, I would have no problems about revealing the name. I gave a list of materials, sources of materials to the board prior to the Washington, D.C. hearing. A couple of things have come to my attention in the last few days. One was in an article in the fourth decade by Philip Coppens, a Belgian journalist. I've been in correspondence with. He reports on an article written by two Dutch journalists about Lee Harvey Oswald's stay in Holland. And one of the things that came out of that is that there was an American Express file on Lee Harvey Oswald in the Rotterdam branch office of American Express. That might give some Express office told the journalists, as far as they knew, there was nothing of particular interest in the file, and therefore they weren't going to show it to them. There was such a file there, and if Oswald had American Express, there may be other American Express files as well. The other matter which has come up, most recently mentioned in Anthony Summer's article on Vanity Fair, is a CIA project called QK Enchant. Apparently, Clay Shaw had a clearance for that project. Apparently, also the director of the San Francisco trademark, who was Shaw's witness to say that he was in San Francisco at the time of the assassination, also had a clearance for that project. I think it's, right now there's nothing in the public record as well as I know about that project, what it was, what it was supposed to be doing. I think it's important to clear that up, get some information out as to what the QK Enchant was. I'm sure that some people will focus on that. That's why we want to do. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Shackelford. Appreciate your assistance.
My name is on the list. Roy Sheep. I will give you information on Mr. Brown.
Okay.
We've added my name on the list. Correspondent talked to you in Washington on videotape.
Yes, my name is Roy Schaefer, and I'm a private citizen. And I never met Halver, but I'm the person.
Could you spell your name for
Okay, it's S-C-H-A-E-F-F-E-R.
I didn't get your first name.
It's Roy.
Roy, thank you.
Thank you.
Schaefer, S-C-H-A-E-F-F-E-R. And I'm the person, Halver mentioned, I'm the person who replaced Oswald after he left El Toro in 1960. He left in 1959 after the machine. So I did have a credit clearance. I won't get into that. Basically, what I'd like to mention is I'm, a private, probably an assassination protocolist. And in 1986, I contacted Jim Harrison. And before he died, he had sent, when he got the Zachary down at the trial in '66, he ran off 100 copies. Okay, and sometime in 1989, I received a copy from him. Okay, and then I've been researching using a copy of the 100 that was made. Now, what I had found then, at first, I'm interested in the Stolt editing of the Zachary film, and I wondered. Zachary said that he had set his camera on the film speed of 24, and so over the years it got me thinking. In 1963, I went to the Daily News, and Eisenhardt was the company that rebuilt the presidential limousine. So I had gone down there with a fellow reporter because I had like a scientific background. Okay, so anyway, what was unique about that time was the emergency lights on the presidential car. Now, the lights were interesting in one aspect. They would blink on one side and then on the other. Okay, so one problem I had so I know there was a constant blink rate. Now, I had taken a lot of 8mm film. In other words, if something has a constant blink rate, and you're photographing it, through like the Zachary that was developed on the camera, then it would show a constant rate. In other words, if it ran at blinker at 0.41 seconds, so it would show a rate of 9 blinks in the film. Now, what I had submitted, I believe you had that record I gave to Mr. Gunn. I plotted from 133 to 238, and the pattern does not show up that way. And so I'm suggesting, to yourselves that proves that alteration, was done to this film. And then also on the night of the assassination, what I believe, the film, I was after he took the film to the Kodak lab in Dallas. Now, I have some film expertise. I served a 6-year government-sponsored apprenticeship in film, and that had what they call a 14K process. Now, this 14K process is how they developed Kodachrome. It's quite complicated. And at that time, the only place that had that process was here in Dallas, next to Love Field, and that was a Dallas Eastern Kodak lab. And for my information on the Max B. Phillips memo, I've been told how I've got on Commission Exhibit 450 that it shows that the Zach Ruger film and I believe 3 copies, were flown to Washington the night of the assassination. I believe they were taken into, they had 5 hours from my timetables. I'm working with Dr. James Fetzer on this, and also Mike Pencer, he's an attorney. Okay. So anyway, I interjected on that, but anyway, I lost my place when I said that. Tim, could you help me? I lost my place. Oh, okay. So anyway, it's a very complicated process, and it takes about 45 seconds. So it's called a K14, the 14K process, because it's what they call a subtractive process, where it's a reversal film that it's like it comes into color transparency after it's developed. So in other words, I believe that they took the original film to the National Interpretation Lab, and at that point, they altered it down to approximately 18 frames per second. And like I say, in 1961, and so what I'm saying is that I believe from frame C133 to 238 is where they altered that. Now the way I found that out was I personally had the film and I went through and plotted each blinking light per frame, and that's how I derived that the film was altered. And unless you have the actual film, there's no way you can determine that. So that's pretty much what I had to say, and I think it's time.
Any questions?
I have one. You say you replaced Oswald. That is to say you took over all his functions, his jobs.
That's correct.
Which were?
Continue talking about Crip, or
Job assignment.
Oh, okay.
What was the job assignment?
Okay, we worked at TAC, it's a Tactical Control Center basically, and it's with, it was basically tracking IFF boxes. There was a Strategic Air Command, and then they had like IFF boxes, and then they would set those, in the morning, and then your prep orders would come down from Washington, and they were like Zulu time rated, 24-hour time, and then there's what they call authentication, so that's what the person that has CRIP does. So our job was, when the planes left the United States through the AVAX area, was to clear them and plot them, and so that was basically what our job function was there at Elton. And I'm sure Oswald did the same thing.
Mr. Chairman, we have, in fact, Mr. Smith had signed up earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Shacker. I appreciate your help.
To follow up here real quick, my name is Ken Smith, and I had the privilege of stopping off at Washington in between assignments and looking at Mr. Oswald's file, which was very difficult to locate, being it was in a boxcar running around in the Peoria, Illinois area. And the essence of what I was told to check on with Oswald was the U-2. Gary Powers was shot down, and he was from Jenkins, Kentucky, which wasn't too far away from where I lived, where my father's brother lived, my father's sister lived. They wanted to be sure that Oswald wasn't going to Russia and divulge anything about his radar bubble, or what this gentleman just went through on his job assignment. That's where I entered the picture historically with Mr. Oswald. Now, getting back to me personally, I collaborated with Mr. Swagger under his Intelligence Investigation Committee. I transported documents and liaison and discussed matters of Kennedy assassination with him under congressional privilege starting in 1972 up into the time that he ran for president with Mr. Reagan, which is the time they felt because of political considerations it would be unfair for me to go ahead and do anything with him. In other words, that's when officially he lost his committee assignments as far as the people that felt I had the right to discuss matters with him. Personally, I'm involved. Personally, I was misled to believe that I could focus on the Kennedy assassination. And I did a considerable amount of investigative work, which has continued from the time that I looked at Mr. Oswald's fire before I came out here to Albuquerque, New Mexico, to years training on crypto. And MK Ultra is what you can look up in Crossfire, or the gentleman might be talking out here to ask about it, or Dick Russell's book that he has out on Oswald also. But I was more involved in electronic aspects of the equipment, radar equipment. And this gentleman here, his job was completely different from mine. I was interested in intelligence. I had the privilege to talk with Mr. Kennedy when I was at Fort Monmouth Signal School. He confided in me that he was interested in running for presidency. He was campaigning in New Jersey at the time. I came out to New Mexico for a year, then I went to Europe. But before I went to Europe, I stopped by, and Kennedy was to have 3 speeches with Richard Nixon. These speeches were to be carried on television, which is a new medium. Military intelligence was interested in anything that had that amount of national exposure. I attended the Geneva disarmament conferences that was started at the end of the Nixon administration. The gist of what happened on this follow-up was there was an attempt on President Kennedy's life in Venice, Italy, which I don't want to go into at this time. However, because of that and other personal knowledge I had concerning security, there was a bad problem with the CIA. Military intelligence took over their own gathering of intelligence. My job, to make it simple, was a nuclear football. I worked on NATO codes for nuclear weapons. Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, insisted these codes be sprinkled. I come into this job. Mostly warrant officers reported to me on intelligence. Because of this, I found a situation in Venice, Italy, which developed. And when I got out of the service, I was asked by military headquarters, Stuttgart, Germany, to, when I came back to the States, Fort Harrison, to divulge what I knew. This came down to the chain of military intelligence. I did work for naval intelligence, which other people talked about here. And there was a possibility of a plot to kill Kennedy. I knew that Oswald was in Minsk, Russia. There was also something nobody wants to say anything about. There were 5 different Soviet spy schools in Minsk. When I came out here, I was understanding that Oswald's file was going to be released, whether or not he'd been working for intelligence agencies prior to the time of the Kennedy assassination. This goes back to what another gentleman said about the district court here. I had to call the district court in Dallas, so I might be your phantom witness one of these days about security precautions on the Kennedy assassination. I did a lot of work and tried very hard to convince Mr. Kennedy through the chain of command, not personally, but it ended up at the White House. Dick Valens, Film Guild, what is it, Jack Valens, is that who it is? The Film Guild did a follow-up with me on this in Kentucky. We looked into all this one time, which I intended to publish on. In 1982, I attempted to publish my book. No go. They didn't want me to publish it. All right. Now, I talked to Mr. Gates, CIA headquarters, after President Bush signed his directive in 1992, saying that the CIA wanted all this brought out, and that they would go along with anybody that they didn't get the national security on that. So that's the reason I feel I've got the right to come here now and tell you that I want to go ahead and publish my book, as long as it doesn't jeopardize national security. Now, states' rights is where I'm held at. I obtained a federal authentication through Marshall University and the dean of the college at Marshall University at the time and prior to the time Kennedy was killed. Now, my congressman was Ken Hepler. He's now West Virginia Secretary of State. He advised me the procedures I was to go through with this, so that later I could publish on what I knew about this prior knowledge. National security estimates are looked at 6 months and 2 weeks. Now this was brought up on C-SPAN, by the way. I'm not telling you any tales out of school here. At the beginning of the week against confirmation hearing, there was an agent went into how you go about if your agent, you feel somebody's life is in jeopardy. I talked to him on the phone, explained my situation to him, but I didn't have no way to explain what happened. So this is already in the public domain now. And I went through the same procedures that an agent of the CIA would have went through. I didn't work for the CIA. I worked for military intelligence. I worked for Navy intelligence. I had made trips behind Iron Curtain. But the gist of it is, to make a long story short today, the FBI knew that there was a plot to kill Kennedy at Dallas. And I've been held in limbo under state rights. I had to go to Charleston, West Virginia, which is my state capital, and appear at the beginning of the War Commission hearing for approximately a day and a half in court altogether. I was there more than that, but my testimony would amount to a day and a half. And I've never been able to publish on any of this follow-up investigation. In 1969, Richard Nixon said, I want all this looked at again. Well, I got a job as a long-haul truck driver. I really didn't like the idea because I'm a college graduate, but I went along with it. And I investigated up in the Chicago area and wherever the judges in Charleston felt was appropriate for me to go to. What I found and finally proved that I confided in Mr. Stryker about Secret Service procedures were defeated at Dallas. That's the reason the President stopped down here before he got to the book depository. They was worried about what was going to happen. I called Washington from Marshall University. I had a monitor set up. They let me monitor it. I had a monitor set up, and they said the Secret Service had been notified that Kennedy's going ahead. And that's where the matter ended. And you know what happened then on news release. But there was prior knowledge. I was with the military. The military said after 30 years, we're not hiding nothing as long as we don't have to do with national security. Stuttgart, Germany was my battalion headquarters. I was under the authority of the Provost Marshal Heidelberg, Germany. And I give testimony to all of this. Charleston, West Virginia, in February after Kennedy was assassinated. And the attorney that represented the state was Mr. Optioner. He was head of the Service Commission. At one time they kept the files on this. Now if you can get state files, everybody will see it. If not, I'm still going to try to publish.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Bob Smith, State West Virginia, WSAZ, showed your picture on TV and said he talked to you. That's where that I approached legal law clerk and started this procedure of obtaining this national security assistance.
Thank you. Well, we've reached the end of our hearing today. All the witnesses who had signed up to testify have testified, the ones that were able to make it. We do intend to publish a draft definition of the term assassination record, hopefully by the middle part of December in the Federal Register for commentary. That's part of the work of the review board to further define the words assassination record as they appear in the legislation which created this board. So that really is one of the next items on our agenda. But on behalf of the review board today, I would like to express my thanks to all the witnesses for their assistance. We appreciate your help and also your willingness to come forward and present testimony to us today. Anyone who is here today who has further information or other information that might be relevant to the assassination of President Kennedy, we would encourage you to provide that information to the review board. We have offices in Washington. You can get our address here if you'd like it. As we move toward the hopeful goal of full disclosure, I hope that all of you will continue to have an interest in the work of the review board, the work that we are trying to do, and hope that you'll all realize that you are partners in this very important effort as we move forward. Thank you very much for your attention and interest.
Can I make one housekeeping comment? For those of you who gave testimony who were not on the initial list of witnesses, please make sure that we have your name and address. Mr. Gunn has a list.
Yes.
And also that we'll be keeping the record of this hearing open until the 16th of December. So if you have additional comments, please send them to us at our Washington address and we'll include them in the record.
I just make a comment regarding something Mr. Hall said. I want to just make a comment. With respect to the records notes that were taken during the interrogation of Oswald, my understanding of that would be that these men were working in capacity, in an official capacity at that time to take notes. And in that official capacity, presumably they were employed by the citizens of the United States. and any notes they might have been taken were being taken not on their own private personal time, but rather on their employed time. And as much as we employed them, I would expect, but I'm not an attorney, I certainly don't know how to say this, that is not their private property, it pertains to murder, and that in fact that those records should be available, and in fact it's stunning to me and surprising that they were not originally made available, they should have been immediately requested, I would have thought, through legal channels. Secondly, on the issue that I raised with respect to Mr. Posner, in the attachment I gave you, behind it is a letter I wrote to the Congress Committee in which I, prior to having spoken with Dr. Boswell myself, I raised the questions about how they could reverse that. I just wanted to explain that. And the final thing is, I wanted to emphasize again the importance of getting records from Parkland Hospital, the official medical records from Parkland Hospital, and also the question of autopsy notes. There's a woman named Kathy Cunningham who's written a very lengthy and extraordinarily detailed thing about the presence of notes from the autopsy that are no longer in the record. And I would like to submit that to you. I think she may have sent it to you under separate cover, but if it could be submitted to you formally today, I would like to do so.
If I may, just for the record here, so that we don't end up with a question mark, I share your concern about the holding of what are essentially public records in private hands. There is, however, a distinguishable issue between those kinds of records and records that are generated entirely privately. And that's, I think, a matter of self-concern.
Okay, with respect to the evidence, and I am not knowledgeable about this aspect of the evidence, but my understanding is that there were many individuals taking contemporaneous notes during the interrogation. These are not reflections upon what happened at a later time and a jotting down of a personal memoir. These apparently are notes that were taken contemporaneously. That, I think, separates them from what someone may reflect upon at a later time at his leisure during his private off-duty hours. And I think it is notes that were apparently taken during the time of the interrogation that is being spoken about here today, if I'm not mistaken. And those are notes which are forward checked.
Randy Lawrence, you've been here earlier, found that I pursued that line of questioning. And the distinction I think you're trying to draw is an important one that I share with you, one that needs to be taken account of in the board's definition of what constitutes an assassination record, which is why I posed the question.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry that I wasn't here.
Thank you, Dr. Lawrence. If you want to present that, we'll take it.